How important is your payment for you? Of course, you know people who say, well, it's not about the money, I'm intrinsically motivated, I'm not doing it for the income, I just love what I do. And yes, there are people who are not motivated by money. However, most people still say that their payment could be better. Many people are not satisfied with their income, and we have to take a deep look into this today because it gets an increasingly important issue as more and more companies have a staff shortage. And even when unemployment is there, certain people simply say, when I look at your income and what you offer me right here, I prefer to not go to work. And of course, this is a debatable attitude because when you live of state's money, then we can debate if that is a very social attitude, and probably it's not. Most likely it's not. Well, definitely it's not. However, when some people say, I either go to work for 40 hours, 50 hours a week, and at the end of the month, I don't have much more money compared to what I get paid by the state, so I prefer to stay at home and not work by getting the same life I have right now. And quite frankly, we can't deny that they have a point there. So we have to look into what's happening with payment right now. And of course, people will wonder, are there any science-based researches or survey where we can stick to and which we can stick to? And yes, we absolutely can. So looking at, for example, when we have the so-called pay gap, I don't mean the gender pay gap between men and women if you stick to the binary gender model. I mean the pay gap between CEOs and workers, for example. So the actual source here is AFL-CIO survey. So when we look into this, and we look at the pay ratio of the S&P 500 index companies, and this is in 2021, so this is actual data. And sometimes you find very surprising numbers, and they get more and more surprising the more you look into these surveys and studies. So when you look at consumer discretionaries, which means goods which consumers might purchase, but they don't have to, the ratio is nearly 750 to 1 on average. So between the highest and the lowest, so-called lowest level in high commerce of in the hierarchical pyramid, you have a 750 to 1 ratio, which is astonishing because, well, some people might now claim this is just how life is. CEOs get absurd incomes, but in any other industry, it's the same. No, it's not. It's absolutely not. If we only look at consumer staples, which means goods that consumers have to buy to get along in life, we have a ratio of 380 to 1. So pretty much half of what we saw before. As soon as we go to IT, we have about 300, healthcare is 250, going into industrials or even financials. Financials is 180, 178 to be precise. Real estate is 130, energy the same, and utilities is 97 to 1. So it is not the same anywhere because when you look into what's happening here, we have a difference of 10 times the amount of money between the CEO and the workers. And of course, people might ask for specific examples because they always will claim there are extreme examples, but in average is not that bad. Well, unfortunately, science says something very different. Again, the source is the AFL-CIO survey. So when, for example, you look at Nike, the sports brand, it's nearly 2,000 to 1 between CEO and workers. When you look at Chipotle, which is a restaurant chain, you have 2,900 to 1. When you look at Western Digital, where some people now say, oh, calculators, yeah, that's just one part of what they do. You nearly have 5,000 to be precise, it's 4,934 to 1 as a ratio. And Aptiv PLC, which is a tech company focusing on tech and mobility, it's the highest in this survey of the S&P 500 companies with 5,294 to 1, which means the highest person in the hierarchical pyramid makes more than 5,000 times as much money as the so-called lowest person in the hierarchical pyramid. And of course now, because I just mentioned tech, I have to add something because people will always say, well, you can get the best salary, just move to California, move to Silicon Valley, and all the great salaries are available to you. The source here, which I'm going to quote now, is dice.com, because what you assume right now, because when we look at where do US tech salaries are growing fast, you have very surprising results, because many people will say, California. No, it's not in the top 10 list. Some people might say then, what about New York City? Yes, that is the third spot, 11 plus 11.6%. Number one is Charlotte, North Carolina, which most people wouldn't have thought of. followed by Orlando, Florida with 13.4%. Cities which most people wouldn't have considered for these kind of jobs or these kind of salary raises. And then it goes down when you go down the list. Detroit has plus 7.7. Phoenix, if you've ever been to Phoenix, is not a place where I would prefer to live, somewhere in the middle of a extremely hot area. It's plus 7.6. And Houston, in the very south of Texas, is plus 7.1%. And on this list, you don't find any city of California in California, and you don't find Boston, where the MIT is, and you don't find Seattle, where many people say is so great to live. Yes, it is, no question about that. But you see, they do not have these salary raises, unlike what most people expect. And of course, now people might claim, well, the minimum wage is also very different, so maybe we need to take this into account. Absolutely correct. The OECD did a survey and a study on that, and they put the minimum wage and translated that to dollars, so we have the same currency. Australia doing very well with $12.60 as a minimum wage. Germany, $11.80. When you go via the Netherlands of 11 and United Kingdom of $10.50, when you go down that route, then United States, $7.30 minimum wage. No matter where you live in the US, try to get along on $7.30. And by the way, when you go down that list, you can always say it's always getting worse with some countries. So Russia is $2.40. However, when we now talk about countries where many of our listeners probably have a location or have workers performing jobs for them, people are aware of these pay gaps. And it is a part of the motivation because, and now we have to look into the problem, as soon as it comes to payment are like school marks. And I just give you an example from my personal school history. Geography teaching. I sat in the classroom with Mr. Moore. Mr. Moore was my geography teacher, an excellent geography teacher. I just learned a lot from him. And it was 11th grade in Germany when I went to school. 13 years is the usual school time before you get your A levels. And after that, go to university. So if you want to, of course, there are other career paths as well. So when you have these marks for, as we say, oral participation, he sat there in front of us and simply went down the name list by last names. Of course, it was sorted. So I was quite on top of the list with my last name being Brabandt. So B on top, normally on top of the list, or normally in the top 3 in class. And he went down the list, and that was all public. I think today with GDPR rules, that might not be common practice anymore. And he said, Brabandt, Niels. And then there was this moment of silence. He said, C+. And I was happy. With that oral participation mark, I saw myself more with a C or a C-, but C+, brilliant. That's better than I thought. Perfect. So here we are. And then he went down the list, blah, blah, blah. And I wasn't even actively listening. But then there was one name which grabbed my attention. And only because he said, name, I'm not going to mention who it was, name C-. And I said, whoa, wait. When that guy gets a C-, I at least need a B, if not a B+. So suddenly my C+, which I was happy with, was not the right solution anymore. And maybe you know these situations. And any kind of payment is exactly the same, because payments also highly rely on comparison within the organization you work in. And I'll just give you an example. It's a commonly known management game, which is often played amongst leaders when they have a professional training or coaching. And it goes like that. I give you the opportunity to restructure the income system in your company. You have 2 options. Option number 1, everyone gets $1,000, or British pound or euros or whatever currency you want to have. So let's take dollars here. Everyone gets $1,000. Perfect, isn't it? Well, option number 2 is you get $1,500. Brilliant. By the way, all the others get $2,000. It's only you getting $1,500. So what's your choice? From a logical point of view, 100% of the people have to choose option number 2, because option number 2 is, even although they get paid less than any of their colleagues, it's still 50% more than option number 1. But this is not how people work. Most people decide to go for option A, because they say it is unjust when anyone gets more than I do, so we all get the same. And this is not logical behavior, but let's face it, many people don't act in a very logical way. Just look at what's happening there right now. We have a global pandemic and you see many people, and by the way, not only uneducated, so-called uneducated people. When we look into science, about 10% of conspiracy theorists are in a very well-earning, well-educated sphere of society, level of society. And even they say, no, I think we shouldn't get a vaccine, which is ridiculous. Of course you should get vaccinated because we will never get out of a pandemic when we don't get the vaccination quota we need. So when we're looking at income, don't tell people that they have to think in a logical way. Because first, it sounds patronizing. Second, it doesn't work like that. And third, when someone tells you don't be emotional, your usual reaction will be to be even more emotional. So that is the first part of the problem. The second aspect is that when you have an organization and the organization is working well, it means, and that is very important, it means that everything is going as it should. In Germany, we call it Betriebsfrieden, which translates peace of the organization. Everything is going as it should, so it's all running well. And this well-running organization, this peaceful, I really like the German word here, Betriebsfrieden, peaceful organization. This peace is very valuable. It's probably one of the most important aspects you have in your business, because when you're constantly arguing with anyone and all the departments don't like to work with each other, you have so much friction that you lose a lot of your profit, a lot of your productivity in arguments amongst different departments. Unfortunately, many leaders say we like when the organization is working well and when everything's peaceful, but leaders unfortunately often don't act like that. Because what they think a peaceful organization should be is, or a resilient organization should be, is leaders tell you what to do and you accept it with no comment whatsoever. And that, of course, is completely surreal. It's not realistic to expect that from anyone, because you're not a dictator, and I hope you don't want to be. People have the right to speak up when something's wrong, and also these workers have rights, at least in most countries. And the third aspect, which is coming along with that, intransparency often gets promoted. So you promote intransparency by telling people something like, you know, in this organization, we don't talk about money. So please don't talk with your colleagues about what you earn here. And in some companies, you even have it written in your contract where it says you're not allowed to tell anyone what your income is. Well, so first, putting it into a contract already is suspicious enough. Telling it people makes it even more suspicious because you don't want to put it in writing. In nearly every country, writing it in a contract is invalid anyway, because people have the right to talk about whatever they want as long as there's not a really good reason why it should be confidential. And keeping your salary confidential, there is no particular reason except when you try to cheat with people and you want to get someone for a lower wage than they normally would get. And by the way, just to let you know, when you tell people not to talk about their salary, what do you think happens? Do you think they say, oh yeah, that sounds legit, so I'm not going to talk about it? As soon as you promote intransparency, as soon as you encourage intransparency, as soon as you make intransparency, non-transparency the norm in your organization, what happens is that people talk about it way more than any other organization, than you find in any other organization. Because people realize that something's going wrong. And then they're going to ask others about their income. And that simply then uncovers, make them discover that something was wrong in the first place. So don't tell people not to talk about their income, because they will do so anyway. And of course, we now have to look into how to do it better. And there are many measures which you can take to make it better. You can, of course, offer seminars, trainings, coachings, consulting and mentoring is very helpful. When you have events, you can invite professional speakers to speak there. And of course, people can help you with project or interim management to get your organization where it should be. I'm happy to discuss that with you, because these are services which I offer. So just send me an email to nb@nb-networks.com. nb@nb-networks.com, and I'm happy to have a chat with you. If you're interested in articles or even more resources than this podcast already, we have articles, podcasts, video interviews, and even more every Wednesday straight to your inbox. Just go to expert.nb-networks.com expert.nb-networks.com. Put your email address in there, and every Wednesday you get an email. It's 100% content at free guarantee. Now we will look into how to do it better. Well, when you look at salaries, payments, compensation, fees, honorariums, no matter how you want to call it, as soon as you pay people, emotion beats logic. It means that as soon as you have an emotional aspect to it, people will realize that you are willing to talk to them on a reasonable level. When you tell people, oh, be logical, behave in a logical way, or why are you again acting against logic? Do you think that anyone is listening to these phrases? Except that people, when it comes to payment, have an emotional factor towards what they get paid. And as leaders, we have to accept that. So when I say, when it comes to payment, emotion beats logic, yes, that is our problem. Because often the common answer is, well, that's not my problem. It is. It almost certainly is. Well, it certainly is. So accept that people get very emotional when it comes to this topic. Also, be sure that you have to be, and that is the second aspect of how to do it better, transparency is crucial. And transparency now, it doesn't mean that you have to display all the incomes of absolutely anyone publicly. In most countries with GDPR laws, that would even be straightforward illegal. However, do not encourage intransparency or non-transparency. And also you have to check, are your salary structures, your payment structures still right for today's times? Are they appropriate? You can have a fixed salary. You can have a flexible salary, so a fixed salary. You can have, for example, commissions, which is rather common, for example, when you work in a sales position. You have commission. You probably have some people maybe on commission only, if you want that. There is no right or wrong, but it has to fit your company culture. Because there is a very important difference when people make money on commission or on a fixed salary, how people deal with each other. Also, leadership becomes a lot more challenging with different fee structures and payment structures. That goes way beyond what we can discuss today. But check if how you handle payment is still appropriate to today's times, or if you are still sitting on a payment system which is probably completely outdated. The third aspect of how to do it better is please stop telling people that there is a meritocracy and that they can work their way up. Of course, they can work their way up. However, by telling them you can work their way up, it can't be any more cloudy or less specific than that. It simply became a cliche that anyone gets told you can work your way up. When we look into where do people on board level come from, it is not usually the I worked my way up history. It's not the rags to riches. That hasn't happened for a very long time. Of course, there's always one example in 100 million people, but you cannot base an N equals 1 experienced and say this is science-backed evidence, because it is not. By the way, this N equals 1 evidence is a phrase from Frank Speeders from Harvard Business School. So you have to tell people, when you tell them you can work your way up, how does the career ladder look like in your organization? So what are the steps? How long does it take? What are the different positions? What do you offer? Do you offer training, coaching, mentoring? Do you offer any kind of development program? How do you offer a career in your organization? And at that point in time, when I tell organizations that they have to mention that, often people tell me, well, we don't like to talk about it because we are very formal and we have some rules which are a bit random and not very appealing to many people. Here's the news. You have to change that. You cannot expect people that they accept your random rules just because either you don't mention them, which means as soon as they find out they're going to leave, or that they accept it and you tell them it has always been like that. The times that people have accepted these phrases are over, and they are over for a very long time already. So it is important that you show people how to have a career. I just give you a good and a bad example. Here's a bad example. In a large corporation, a very well-performing person, he was responsible and accountable for the whole customer service, lots of emails, lots of phone contacts, thousands of contacts per day. And he did very well, and then he wanted to become the leader of a whole location instead of just one department in a location. So he applied to a certain location to be the leader there. And the answer there was, and I quote word by word, "You're the perfect candidate, you're the perfect person, you're the perfect hire, but we can't accept your application because you don't have a bachelor's degree. You didn't go to university. So not only did they turn him down based on this completely random aspect, they hired someone who had a bachelor's degree in philosophy, who had no experience in customer service whatsoever, straight from university, went there and of course massively failed. Not really too surprising. I don't want to say that philosophy is bad. That's not the message. It's an important field of science. It's an important field for society. However, it doesn't qualify you to be a communication expert and customer service expert in a corporate surrounding, especially not when you have zero experience in the field and only the degree in your hands. And when you still have these formal steps, and by the way, the message here is not that university degrees are bad. That is not the message. There's a good reason why you can have them. Scientific qualification is very valuable. Look on my LinkedIn profile. You see that I do university education left, right, and center. However, understanding something in theory and mastering something in practice are often two different aspects of the same issue. And as long as you put random marks in the sand and say, we just put a mark here and a border here and a limitation there, and there is no reason whatsoever why you do so, then people will be very frustrated. And of course, the person that was turned down for that job, by the way, left the organization and now works for a competitor, where he not only was a leader for a whole location, but was promoted to one level below board level within 6 months after. So a great talent, obviously, but they missed out on the opportunity to promote the right person. This is why you always say hire for skills, promote for attitude. The promote for attitude bit means you promote people a bit earlier than they would expect it. So they don't start, what many people do today, when they have the idea of being promoted, they start to compare all the different jobs on the market because they say, I can be promoted within the organization or somewhere else. So maybe time for a job change and get a bit more money on the way to it. So promote for attitude, so promote people a bit earlier than they expect it to happen. And that's your job as a leader to discover when the right point is, by the way. Also, the first bit, hire for skills. When someone is able to master the craft they should do, you hire that person. And I remember when I worked in my career, first for a pharmaceutical company and then for an IT tech company, both times where I didn't have the formal qualification for it, but people trained me on it, and obviously someone from their leadership team saw something in me which even I didn't see. And for the largest Microsoft partner for learning solutions, I was an award-winning leader at the end, based on customer feedback, by the way, not something internal Chumbawamba award, a proper award, not an award you buy, by feedback from customers for delivering IT services. Because they were great at promoting for attitude, but they hired for skills. Not a single time did someone ask me, where did you study and what did you study? Of course, sometimes there are legal limitations. When you run a hospital, you can't say, oh, we don't need medical degrees. Of course you do, because the law tells you that you must have these degrees. However, in many different areas, degrees don't tell you much. And when you see the academics quota at the moment, where it's going, in the UK it's going beyond the 50%, in South Korea it's more than 70%. When we come to the point that anyone has a degree, we all know that these degrees are not worth much. It's nothing else than we expect people to sit through it, and the level of education you get is basically a bit more than school plus a thesis of 10 pages at the end. So this work your way up. You have to tell people how it properly works. And here is the good example. One of my clients, and this is nothing which happened due to my help. This happened before I worked with them. There is one person in the organization. He's now leading the whole IT department internationally with all their locations globally. And that person started in that company as the apprentice. He started with an apprenticeship and worked his way up. But this working the way up was based on skills, projects and achievements, not based on, look, I have a piece of paper here and a piece of paper there, which is not relevant to their business model, because the business they work in is fashion, and that is not a regulated industry. It's now an international corporation, and the person who is now leading the IT department, which is a tremendously important asset of this organization, can say, I started as an apprentice, so when anyone starts to work there, they see very clearly in this organization it is possible. And that is a great example of how to do it right. One thing you have to expect, and that is the last bit of how to do it better, The fourth bit of how to do it better is that you have to accept that the bad people always stay. So no matter how bad your leadership is, no matter how bad people work, no matter how bad you treat them, which by the way is unacceptable. You can't treat people deliberately bad just to get rid of them. Bad people always stay because they are so lethargic, so phlegmatic that they simply say, look, I turn up, I get my payment, I walk home and it pays my bills, I get my pension plan done, and then it's just okay. Nothing more, nothing less. And we have to accept that we as leaders created these issues. And by the way, you cannot, in many countries, you cannot simply fire them, because in many countries you have protection based on your life situation, your age, or other conditions, situations, or aspects of your life which protects you from being fired just on the spot. I know in some countries you don't have that, but in most European countries now, and in most other countries, this is now in place, that you cannot be just fired because someone says, you leave today, anyone else stays. It is important now that when you see that bad people start to occur, and you see people who do not perform well, they do the bare minimum, they don't go below the bare minimum which you expect them to do, but they are just the bare minimum, which means they don't have a good vibe, they don't have a good attitude, they don't bring a great motivation to the team, they basically demotivate others by their way and how phlegmatic they are and how non-motivated they are. We as leaders create these people because we frustrated them so much that we took any bit of motivation out of them. It's not their fault. People often, especially when it's not great payment, people just want to get along. They want to pay their rent. They want to have short trips to work, short trips back, and they just want to live their life. And when we as leaders were unable to motivate them, we cannot complain when we suddenly have them on staff and we see them happening, because it is us who created these people. So when you have put the first three aspects in place, which means you accept that the emotion beats logic in this game, and you will promote transparency, not intransparency or non-transparency, and you stop to do the cloudy meritocracy, work your way up stuff, you properly show people how to have a career, then you have to accept that when bad people happen, we created them, and we have to face the fact that we are responsible and accountable that these people happened. So it is very important that when you take a look at what we've done today in this podcast, you look at what have you done so far, what did you like? Look at your salary structure, because you don't change it overnight. There is no one-size-fits-it-all solution, but be very aware that this is a slow change project. You look at your structures of payment, then you talk to people. You probably should do a leadership survey, including a payment survey. The results are most likely not comfortable for you to read, but that is the foundation of what you need to act with future steps to become a better organization. It is now very important, by the way, that we, of course, interviewed other people about this as well, about different aspects of work, payment, locations, remote teams, etc. So on the German podcast channel, you find Steffen Ritter, who's one of the most well-known people in the insurance industry. And you know, insurances, it's a lot about money. Payment is a part of it, but we discussed in German with him a lot more than that. On the English channel, just yesterday, we published an interview of Friedrich Mittelstedt. He's not only leading a team and is a senior engineer at Reddit, global company working worldwide, he leads remote teams, and although with his skills in tech and the IT sector, he could easily have stayed where he grew up in Berlin and had a career there, but he decided to leave the country, didn't come back. And that, by the way, is an ongoing issue in Germany. Normally 3% compared to society and the whole Federal Republic of Germany. 3% of Germans per year leave the country to go somewhere else. Yes, some come back because they didn't have proper plan or something didn't work out, but 3% per year leave the country. That went up by 1/4 to 4%. And often well-qualified people leave, which is called the brain drain. And this is becoming an ongoing issue with the Federal Republic of Germany. And payment often is one reason why people leave the country. I left Germany, my birth and home country, and I moved to London, now living in between London and Spain. And of course, the salary options and the payment options I had internationally were one part of it. So if you want to know what this is all about, listen to the interview which we published yesterday with Friedrich Mittelstedt from Reddit. Of course, now it is very important that many people might have questions. So please feel free to send me an email at nb@nb-networks.com. nb@nb-networks.com. I'm always very happy about the discussions we have every week. It is now very important that when you look at this podcast, I know it is a very sensible topic, and I know that it's not easy to change, and I know it is not possible to change it quickly. But no matter how hard you try to tell people it's not about payment, it's not only about payment, but it is also about payment. And when you try to get qualified people to do great jobs, but not pay them well, you will quickly realize that this is not a sustainable approach to business. I now wish you all the best putting this in place in your organization. I'm happy to help with you. Just drop me an email and we can chat from there. And for this week, there's only one thing left to say for me. Thank you very much for your time.